Mercedes' engine advantage is the real reason behind its dominance, because internal materials were allegedly engineered to expand under heat, pushing the geometric compression ratio from a legal cold, 16:0, to an effective hot running ratio approaching 18:1. That specific thermal expansion claim is what turned the 2026 paddock into a pressure cooker, forcing the FIA to conduct secret compression checks at operating temperature while rival manufacturers demanded immediate action. But here is the tension that still hangs over every single race weekend this season. Even after the governing body privately told Mercedes their engine was legal, and even after a unanimous rule change was rushed through to close the measurement gap, nobody has ever publicly confirmed whether that alleged 10 to 13 horsepower advantage actually existed in the first place. The loophole was closed, but the question of whether it powered a championship lead remains completely unanswered. Rivals did not just whisper about this in the motorhomes. Honda, Ferrari, and Audi formally challenged the design, suspecting that Article C5. 3 had been exploited through clever metallurgy rather than outright illegality. They believed the engine passed ambient inspections, but transformed into a non-compliant beast once it hit 130 degrees Celsius. This was not a vague complaint about general performance. It was a targeted accusation about specific internal components expanding beyond tolerances that other manufacturers assumed were fixed. So why did the FIA's private legality finding fail to satisfy them? Why did the sport have to rewrite the technical regulations mid-season instead of simply issuing a clarification? The answer lies in a gray area between innovation and exploitation that no amount of official statements has fully resolved. You are watching a championship battle where the leader's car might be faster for reasons that exist only in a space between two different temperature readings. Engine temps spiked, rivals panicked, rules shifted. Let's look at the hard numbers defining this dispute before we get to the on-track consequences. The original 2026 technical regulation set a maximum geometric compression ratio of 16, O for any cylinder, measured strictly at ambient temperature. Estimates from rival camps suggested Mercedes achieved nearly 18,001 when hot. That potential 2-point gap represents a massive combustion efficiency delta in a formula where electrical deployment is already maxed out. Some reports quantified this as a 10 to 13 horsepower gain, though others hinted the benefit could be larger under specific load conditions. Crucially, the FIA has never validated that horsepower figure. Their official statement addressed only the measurement methodology, not the performance delta. We are dealing with a suspected advantage that exists entirely in rival telemetry and media speculation, not in any published scrutineering document. So where does that leave us regarding the core allegation? The foundation of this entire controversy rests on a physical property of metal that changes with heat, yet the resolution was purely bureaucratic. The FIA found the engine legal under the rules as written, but the rules themselves were deemed insufficient to capture the intent of the regulation. This created a paradox where Mercedes could be simultaneously compliant and controversial, dominant and unpenalized. As we dig deeper into how this played out in the championship standings and in the development war, keep asking yourself whether a rule change that looks forward can ever truly settle a debate about what happened in the past. The teenage driver leading the title fight right now is benefiting from a machine whose ultimate potential may never be officially quantified. The mechanism behind this alleged advantage requires understanding exactly how the 2026 power unit formula differs from its predecessors. This new generation of engines features a significantly larger electrical component than any before it, which fundamentally altered how manufacturers approached thermal management and combustion chamber design. When you introduce that level of electrical complexity alongside traditional internal combustion, the old precedents for measuring compliance simply evaporated. There was no historical baseline for how a hybrid system this sophisticated should behave across such a wide thermal range. Mercedes appears to have identified that regulatory vacuum and designed materials specifically to operate within it. The geometric compression ratio limit of 16:0 was written with cold metal in mind, but racing engines spend almost their entire competitive life at extreme heat. If your piston crown or cylinder liner expands more than your competitor's designs when reaching operating temperature, you effectively gain displacement and compression that never shows up on a scrutineer's bench. Metals shifted, tolerances vanished, gains materialized. But here is where the narrative gets genuinely complicated, because not every specialist outlet accepted this loophole theory as established fact. While Motor Biscuit framed the story around clever engineering exploiting a thermal blind spot, GP fans published an entire piece explicitly titled around evidence that disproves the compression allegations. This is not a minor editorial disagreement. It represents a fundamental split in how the paddock interprets the same set of regulations and the same performance data. One camp sees a clear exploitation of measurement methodology. The other sees legitimate innovation being misrepresented by frustrated rivals. So, which interpretation actually reflects what happened inside those cylinders? The truth is, we cannot know with certainty, because the FIA's private testing confirmed legality without publishing the underlying data, and the rival estimates of 10 to 13 horsepower remain unverified by any independent source. We are left with two competing narratives about the same engine, both plausible, neither definitively proven. What does it actually mean for a championship contender when their core advantage exists in this state of permanent ambiguity? Consider Andrea Kimi Antonelli sitting atop the driver's standings with 209 points at the summer break, having won 6 races including Monaco and Belgium. He is 19 years old, still a teenager for part of this season, and he has publicly stated that he did not expect to be leading the championship. His performance is undeniable, his maturity remarkable, yet every lap he completes is shadowed by questions about whether the car beneath him owes its pace to brilliance or to a measurement artifact. Bradley Lord, Mercedes' deputy team principal, praised Antonelli's calm consistency and self-belief building weekend to weekend, noting his feet remain firmly on the ground. But even that praise carries an unspoken weight. How do you separate driver excellence from mechanical controversy when the mechanical controversy itself remains unresolved? Let's reframe what we have covered regarding the technical dispute so far. The core issue involves heat-expanding materials potentially creating a compression ratio gap between cold inspection and hot operation, prompting formal challenges from 3 rival manufacturers and resulting in a mid-season regulatory adjustment rather than a penalty. Now consider the human cost of that ambiguity. Every engineer in the Mercedes garage knows that their work has been questioned at the highest levels. Every rival team principal knows they lost a political battle even if they may have won the technical argument eventually. And every fan watching Antonelli extend his 50-point lead over Lewis Hamilton has to decide whether they are witnessing pure talent or the beneficiary of a rule interpretation that may never be fully litigated. The 130 degrees Celsius threshold is not just a number in a technical directive. It is the temperature at which trust in the sport's competitive balance begins to distort. The formal complaints from Honda, Ferrari, and Audi forced the governing body into an unprecedented position of conducting undisclosed compression checks at operating temperature, a testing protocol that had never been part of standard scrutineering before this dispute erupted. These were not routine inspections carried out in public view during a race weekend. They were targeted investigations prompted directly by manufacturer pressure, executed behind closed doors with results communicated privately to Mercedes alone. The FIA's conclusion was clear. Under the regulations as they stood at the moment of testing, the engine was legal. But that private clearance created its own set of complications. How do you tell 3 major manufacturers who have invested hundreds of millions into their own power unit programs that their rival's advantage is permissible, without showing them the data that led to that determination? You cannot. And so, the tension persisted even after the legality question was technically answered. Complaints filed. Tests run. Verdict sealed. What makes this sequence of events so unusual is that the FIA's private finding did not end the controversy. It actually intensified it. Rival teams now knew that Mercedes had passed inspection, but they also knew that the inspection itself had been extraordinary enough to warrant secrecy. That combination bred suspicion rather than reassurance. If the engine were straightforwardly compliant, why conduct secret hot temperature tests at all? The very act of investigating validated the rivals' concerns even as the outcome rejected them. This is where the political dimension of Formula One engineering becomes inseparable from the technical one. Legality is not just about meeting written specifications. It is about maintaining enough trust among competitors that the championship retains credibility. Mercedes had the former but was rapidly losing the latter. So, what does a governing body do when a private legality finding fails to restore competitive confidence? The answer came through direct engagement with all 5 power unit manufacturers, resulting in a unanimous e-vote to change the measurement regime entirely. The FIA statement confirmed that significant effort had been invested in finding a solution, ultimately determining that compression ratio would be controlled in both hot and cold conditions from June 1, 2026 onward. This was not a penalty against Mercedes. It was a systemic correction acknowledged by every manufacturer on the grid, including Mercedes themselves. By voting unanimously, all parties effectively agreed that the old measurement method was insufficient regardless of whether any single team had exploited it. The resolution transformed a bilateral dispute into a collective regulatory evolution. Let's consolidate the regulatory response before examining its championship implications. 3 manufacturers formally challenged Mercedes' engine design, prompting secret hot temperature compression tests that privately cleared the car as legal under standing 2026 rules. Yet that clearance failed to resolve the underlying competitive tension, and ultimately necessitated a forward-looking measurement change approved unanimously by all 5 power unit manufacturers. Notice what is absent from that summary. There is no penalty, no points deduction, no disqualification. The entire resolution was prospective, meaning everything Mercedes achieved before June 1, 2026 remains untouched, regardless of whether their engine exploited a thermal measurement gap. This is critical context because it means Andrea Kimi Antonelli's 6 wins and his 50-point championship lead exist in a zone of permanent regulatory ambiguity. The car was legal when it won those races. The rules changed afterward. But the results stand exactly as recorded. Remember how this all started, with the claim that Mercedes' engine advantage is the real reason behind its dominance, because internal materials allegedly expanded under heat to push compression from a legal cold, 16.0, to an effective hot ratio approaching 18,001. That specific thermal expansion allegation is exactly what the unanimous rule change was designed to neutralize going forward, without ever retroactively punishing the team for exploiting it. From June 1, 2026 onward, compression ratio must be measured in both cold and hot conditions at 120 degrees Celsius, and from 2027 onward, only the hot operating condition will count. This dual measurement regime effectively eliminates the thermal blind spot that made the original loophole possible, ensuring no manufacturer can pass cold inspection while running a fundamentally different combustion profile at temperature. The FIA described this compromise solution as the product of significant invested effort, language that signals how difficult it was to achieve consensus among 5 competing manufacturers with vastly different engineering philosophies. Rules tightened, consensus reached, era closed. Why does this forward-looking fix matter more than any potential penalty would have? Because stripping points or wins would have required proving intent to deceive, not just clever interpretation of ambiguous wording. The FIA's private testing confirmed legality under standing rules, which means any retroactive punishment would have been legally indefensible regardless of competitive fairness. Instead, the unanimous vote represents something rarer in Formula One, collective acknowledgement that the regulations themselves were flawed, not necessarily the teams operating within them. Every manufacturer, including Mercedes, agreed the measurement method needed updating. That unanimity is itself a form of resolution, transforming what could have been a bitter cheating scandal into a collaborative regulatory improvement.